Neringa Venckiene may not be a name you've heard before, but it is a name that you'll never forget once you hear the story. Neringa's story involves impeachment, political asylum, extradition, disturbing murders, a custody battle, and a good versus evil fight against. Neringa used to be a judge and parliamentarian in Lithuania. Her career as a judge lasted 13 years. Beginning in 2008, she began seeking justice for her own niece, who was allegedly by two different government officials. After Neringa's quest for justice began, so did her persecution. You heard that right. For trying to expose this and corruption in the Lithuanian government, Neringa was targeted by authorities in her own country. On today's episode, we're diving deep into another dark and deeply disturbing story of government corruption that is run unchecked, and attempting to show you guys that things like this aren't conspiracies. They aren't things that happen in foreign countries and they don't touch America. This story ends up in America, and yeah, it's unbelievable. You're gonna see what I'm talking about in a moment. As always, I'm not going anywhere and I'm not planning on doing anything to myself. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. If you want to check the resources and gather information for it yourself and see that I'm not just making stuff up, head to the resources document that I'm posting in the description of this show. And also, if you want to watch this episode completely uncensored, please head over to my Patreon. There is a link in the description and in a pinned comment. This episode is on there, and I post all episodes of the show early, ad-free, and uncensored. So if you love the show and you want to help support what we're doing here, that's a great way to do so. Anyways, y'all, my name's Colin Browen. Welcome to the Conspiracy Files. So right now I'm just getting back from a 12-day trip in America with my entire film crew for my production that I've been self-funding and financing and, producing, directing, putting together over the past 7 months or so, following a that existed in America that was larger and deeper and more complex than you could possibly imagine. I just spent the last week sitting down with victims of these crimes, crying with them, hearing their stories, documenting their stories, interviewing family members of children that were infamous murderers, getting to know them, talking to family members of a woman it was their mom who was allegedly to protect this ring. So it's been a long, dark, and heavy week, but the series that we are shooting, we have a team of 5 people that are all deeply invested in this story, people from film backgrounds who've worked huge shows before that have partnered with me to make this thing a reality. And we're fighting endlessly and tirelessly to bring these people to justice and to try and expose these things that have happened that, as you're seeing in the news right now, are continuing to happen. So yeah, I've already had a long, tedious, exhausting week. I just got back from my trip last night at around 11:30. Here I am in the studio the next morning. So it's crazy, but I'm telling you guys, I'm dedicating my life to this stuff. I know people about why am I talking about this so much? Why are you bringing this stuff up? But not only is it my passion, but it's just crazy. Once you go down the rabbit hole, opening up to these things, and you realize that this wasn't a one-off case. These rings of criminals existed for decades, unchecked, and to this day they still exist. So raising awareness around this history that I feel has been completely hidden and covered up is imperative if we're going to try to stop this stuff. We have to at least inform people to show them this stuff is real. I mean, look at even the coverage of some of the Epstein stuff. I've seen hundreds, thousands of people denying that this could be a reality, that Epstein was children, essentially, to powerful individuals. They just flat out deny it like it's not possible. Not only is it possible, but it's documented that this stuff has happened before. And I don't know what it is. I had a lot of talks with a lot of people this last week. Is it when these people get to these positions of power, they're just given whatever they want and the darkest sides of these individuals come out? Is it blackmail? Are these sorts of people that want to attracted to positions of power so that they can do sorts of things like that? I don't know what it is, but there is a definite pattern here. And once again, I'm not talking total zany, far out conspiracy, which I personally feel was, a misinformation machine. I know people are going to think that's a controversial take, but I want to make a whole video about that and the tenuous beginnings of that entire theory. But when you say stuff like this to people, they immediately label you as somebody like that. That's why I personally feel like something like that was created so that people who question these narratives and try to talk about this stuff can be delegitimized immediately, like, oh, he's just crazy. He's a guy. This stuff is very real, unfortunately. It's just crazy. It's crazy. But without further ado, I know there's going to be someone in the comments who says timestamp, whatever. This is when the episode really begins. People want to skip my little intro, but I feel like it's important to keep you guys updated and to tell you how I really feel, because this stuff is important to me. I feel like I've been called by someone or something to expose this stuff. And when you guys see what we've been working on, you will understand. This isn't a YouTube video that we've been doing. Like, this trip and this project has taken us overseas to Amsterdam, Germany, India, knocking on the doors of these people, trying to get answers and justice, tracking down the ghost of this guy who was hopping country to country, who left a trail of tears and horrible, and potentially murder in his wake. Today's episode goes right along with all these other stories we've talked about. So I guess let's go back to the beginning and figure out what started all of this. Well, it was somebody named Daimantė Kedaitė. Now, Daimantė Kedaitė, Neringa's 5-year-old niece, claimed that government officials and her mother's friend her while she was staying with her mother. She visually demonstrated to the authorities exactly what these people had done to her in very graphic detail, and told Neringa where that she had been were using her body, and demonstrating what they were using her 5-year-old body for. Now, Daimantė said that when she visited her own mother, she alleged that she had been by 3 men. The men were later determined to have allegedly been Andreas Jusas, a businessman and advisor to the Speaker of Parliament, Judge Jonas Firmanovicius, and ELITES, a man that has only ever been identified by his first name. So right there, you've got an advisor to the Speaker of Parliament in Lithuania, a judge, and a guy only identified by his first name but claimed to be involved in the government. Now, the young 5-year-old girl's claims were evaluated by court-ordered psychologists and psychiatrists. They had a whole team that were looking into this and pressing her to see if she was telling the truth. And all the teams, all the individuals found that she was telling the truth, that her claims were credible, that this most likely happened. Though I should put it in here that some people who didn't believe the young girl claim that she may have been coached by her father. I don't believe that, but it is something that people say about this whole thing, because Daimantė's father, Drasius Ketis, sent more than 200 requests for an investigation into his daughter's claim. Neringa, the judge, petitioned with her own brother for a full investigation. They were all on board with this, and they wanted an investigation opened into what happened to their loved one. Now, Neringa, Drasius, they reached out to law enforcement and the courts, begging them to investigate these claims, but all parties involved felt that the investigation was rushed and deeply negligent. In fact, Ketis, the girl's daughter, sent over 200 DVDs containing recordings of his daughter's testimony. The DVDs went to some members of the Seimas, Lithuanian MEPs, media outlets, foreign embassies, and even the Lithuanian Ministry of Justice. Daimantė, the young girl's father, also spoke to national media outlets and asked for help from local politicians. Nobody wanted to help the family, it seemed, and help wasn't coming. On October 5th, 2009, Judge Jonas Firmanovicius and a woman who wasn't Daimantė's mother were murdered. So the judge that was accused of the young girl and another woman who was not the young girl's mom were killed. At the time, Lithuanian police said that the shots had been fired from a white VW transporter van, which was allegedly owned by the company that Ketis worked for at the time. One of Ketis's former friends, keep in mind Ketis is the 5-year-old girl's father, Mindaugas Zalimas, a former police informant, stated that the police knew that the killings had been planned and they did nothing to stop them. They allowed these murders to happen. It's alleged that this statement, talking about the fact that the police allowed these murders to occur, caused the resignation of one of Lithuania's highest police chiefs, one of the highest ranking officers in Lithuania. Daimantė, the young girl's father, disappeared the day that the murders occurred and obviously immediately became the prime suspect. It was announced by prosecutors via the media outlets throughout the country that Daimantė's father's DNA was found on the murder weapon, and they then confirmed that Daimantė's father committed the crime. Sort of a revenge. You, my daughter, you got away with it. I'm going to. However, later on, prosecutors retracted those statements and claimed to the public they had made a big mistake. As it turned out, no DNA evidence was found. There was zero DNA. However, they made this big announcement saying that DNA was found on the murder weapon, clearly linking the father to the murders, but then all of a sudden, there was no DNA to begin with. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, the very start of where this thing becomes incredibly bizarre. Now, when Daimantė's father disappeared, the father of the victim, she, the victim, was placed in a psychiatric hospital. Neringa, the judge, was then granted custody of Daimantė and took her home. April 2010, Ketis, Daimante's father, the man who was accused of carrying out those murders, who wanted justice for his baby girl, was found dead. A gun was found near his body, a gun which, according to prosecutors, was allegedly used in the October 2009 double murder. Kedis's death, very suspiciously, according to the authorities in Lithuania, was caused by vomiting due to some individuals who have studied this case, including some close to the case, actually on the ground in Lithuania, have stated that this manner of death, this reason why he died, was completely fabricated. It was invented by authorities, and that in reality, after looking at the body, it appeared that he was actually to death. The injuries on his body were so severe that, it just did not line up with the official story whatsoever. Now, Neringa, who was in custody of the victim, she's her aunt, remember, began to speak out immediately against the corruption that she was seeing take place in the Lithuanian courts. And Neringa was actually a pretty powerful woman in the country. She was a judge herself. She wanted justice for her niece. That's all that she wanted. And all of a sudden, her brother's dead under suspicious circumstances. One of the persons that her niece accused of her was dead in a very suspicious, unsolved, if you want to call it that, homicide. And also of note, in June of 2010, just around that same time, Andreas Usis, one of the other people who was accused of Daimantė, the young girl, he was also found dead. The government of Lithuania stated that Andreas, who, remember, was deeply involved in state and national politics, they stated that he had died of natural causes, even though his body was found laying in a few inch deep puddle of water right near his four-wheeler. His helmet wasn't on his head. It was found near him. So all of a sudden in this case, out of nowhere, people start dropping dead. First, it's one of the accused, then it's the victim's father, then all of a sudden, it's another one of the accused, and they're all dying in these really bizarre ways. I mean, you have a random targeted hit, assassinated with gunfire. Then you have vomiting to death. Vomiting because of alcoholism, you vomit yourself to death, even though people claim he was covered in, bruises and injuries like he was. Then you have another of the accused who's suddenly dead from natural causes, even though he's laying in a puddle face down near a four-wheeler. His helmet isn't on him. It would have been on him if he had been riding. None of it really makes sense. Interestingly, a social research company conducted a poll in Lithuania from November 21st to 22nd, 2011. The topic of the poll was whether or not the public believed the official versions of the deaths of Kedis, the victim's father, and Usis, the accused, and if they believed the government was being truthful. And this was crazy. Only 4.4% of Lithuanians believed that the results were truthful. Only 4%. 4.4% of people living in Lithuania, according to this sample, believed that the government was telling truth about these deaths. The results were then published in ELITES, a magazine. But we have to go back in the story for a second. So remember, the young girl, Daimantė, she claimed that when she was brought over to her own mother's house, that's when those men from the government were brought over who were in extremely graphic and disturbing ways. But her mother was never indicted for her part in the of her own daughter, even though in 2009, a district court ruled that there was more than enough evidence to indict her, which is strange. You have this victim claiming that her mother facilitated this stuff and potentially joined in. You have a district court looking through the facts of the case and determining they have more than enough to bring this woman in who essentially her own daughter out to. And yet they do nothing. They don't indict her. They don't ask her anything. In 2010, the Lithuanian parliament deemed the investigation into young Daimantė's allegations was negligent. They found that things had been covered up. Things had been disappeared. Evidence had gone missing. They found that the negligence itself had compromised the case against the two public officials. So there you go. The Lithuanian parliament is saying that the investigators and the people looking into this case had it up so badly that the case against two government officials that were allegedly this little girl couldn't go through. The court also accused Daimantė's father, the man who died from vomiting, of making up the allegations in order to harm his ex-wife. So they also determined that, this thing was just a fabrication. It was a fantasy. Never mind the multiple people that died all of a sudden and the evidence that the court found was enough to actually indict someone. Never mind all that. It was just some sort of lie that the husband invented to get back at his ex-wife. After this, a few individuals working on this case were fired. They included the prosecuting attorneys due to their negligence in the investigation and their lack of coordination with one of the suspects, case, which resulted in lost evidence, and the child's rights ombudsman. Other individuals involved in the case were forced to resign and included Algimantas Valentinas, the Attorney General of Lithuania, and multiple prosecutors. So they determined that this case was completely botched and said, you guys were deeply negligent in all of this. You did not do your job. You did not get to the truth in the situation. You let justice escape. And we also have the evidence in order to indict the mom. And obviously you're being negligent because the evidence was never collected or gathered. But then at the same time, they're saying, but we also think that the dad just made it up. So that doesn't track. That doesn't make sense to me. How do you determine that all these people, prosecutors, attorney general, prosecuting attorneys, how are they negligent in a case and it's deemed a complete? But in the same breath, there wasn't a case in general because, according to them, these allegations were all fabricated. In May of 2010, the courts determined that Daimantė's mother, the victim, should have custody of her daughter, even though the case against her hadn't been concluded at the time. Daimantė, the victim, 5 years old at the time of the was testifying against her own mother at the time for facilitating for allowing the to come. And yet the court said that the mom should have her. Neringa, the judge and the girl's aunt, was ordered to give her niece back to her mother. Daimantė refused to return to her own mom, stating that she was afraid of being again. It was obvious she was deeply afraid of her own mother. She had been, and yet the courts are saying, even though we have a case and we're interviewing you about this case, you need to give the daughter back, and the person who's you needs to bring you back into that home. During this time, hundreds, possibly thousands of Lithuanians kept vigils outside of Neringa's house to prevent the government from taking Daimantė, her niece, away from her. Neringa was a savior here. She was fighting for justice. She was fighting for the light. She was fighting for the good, trying to protect her niece. And yet the government, for some reason in the midst of all of this, said, we need to rehome your own niece back with her accused. People were pissed though. They were having these vigils, hundreds of thousands of people standing outside of Neringa's house saying, we're praying for you and we're hoping this turns out differently, but it didn't. Neringa's own son, Karolis Venckiene, made a statement regarding his cousin's state of mind at the time, saying, quote, my cousin, he's talking about Daimantė, the young girl at this point, the victim, developed PTSD from attempts to return her to her mother, and her doctors issued an order against further traumatizing attempts, end quote. A few years later, on May 17, 2012, the government of Lithuania sent more than 200 police officers to Neringa's house to take her niece, Daimantė, the victim, away from her. More than 200 police officers to confiscate a girl who had accused her own mother and others to return her to that home. The officers during this used force to take Daimantė, the young girl, from her aunt. It's said and it was reported that the child was ripped from Neringa's arms. She was desperately not wanting to go back to her mother. They literally ripped this child out of her aunt's arms and she was carried away from her, shrieking, crying, screaming, thrashing. Karolis Venckiene, the girl's cousin, stated in 2018 that he hadn't seen his cousin since she was taken away. Now, the actions taken by the government in removing that young girl, the victim, from her aunt's custody resulted in massive protests against the Lithuanian government, both in Lithuania and at Lithuanian embassies all across the world. These events set off an absolute firestorm, kind of like the White Marches in a way in the Marc Dutroux case in Belgium. Neringa, the girl's aunt and the judge, resigned from her position as a judge and founded a new political party. This party, she said, was to focus on anti-corruption and it was called Way of the Courage. The party elected Neringa to the parliament in the year 2012. They were able to harness this horrible situation and turn it into something that they thought would be positive. And interestingly, they won 7 seats in the parliament, even though they had zero funding. This was entirely grassroots, and they were essentially running on messaging, saying, we don't have the money. We don't have the big, powerful political backers and donors. We don't have all the lobbyists and people behind us. We essentially have these thoughts. No more corruption, no more in our government. Neringa promised that she was going to reform the court and political system. And her main aim that she talked about all the time was to enforce stricter punishments on citizens for corruption charges and anything related to or the of children. And in the wake of all this, obviously in the country, some people came up out of the cracks like they always do and started claiming that she had facilitated the exploitation of her own niece in order to win her some sort of political power or sway, give her a backstory as to why she was doing this. But obviously, when you look at the facts of this case, that's just not true. Those are just people, once again, that exist everywhere on Earth. They come out, when they see a little weakness or a crack and try to exploit that crack for their own personal gain because they think that they know more than other people do. 2012, that same year, Neringa authored a book titled Way of Courage, which discussed in detail her niece's ordeal, the perceived cover-up, and the government's failure to thoroughly investigate and prosecute the case that was handed to them against public officials and people in the government who were allegedly. However, this new change, almost like Obama in America, it was a new era, it was exciting, people had something to look forward to. This new era in Lithuania wouldn't last for long. After the election in which Neringa won a seat in parliament, the following actions were taken by the government. The prosecutor general asked the parliament to remove Neringa's legal immunity. April 9th, 2013, liberal, socialist, and conservative parties all voted in favor of removing Neringa's legal immunity, prior to any evidence of wrongdoing that she was allegedly involved in ever being presented. Also, before the ruling of the parliamentary commission that was supposed to investigate this matter. 80 different MPs, government officials in Lithuania, supported the removal of Neringa's legal immunity. 23 were against and 15 abstained. So they immediately, once she got in with this messaging and this goal to change the government, all these officials flipped on her. They opened investigations. They wanted to take away her legal immunity that she had been granted in the past, and they were doing so that they could essentially prosecute her, silence her, and stop this anti-corruption movement from taking hold in their government. In fact, after all this was said and done, once Neringa's political immunity, whatever you'd call it, was removed, more than 35 criminal charges, were filed against her. Here are just a few of them. They claim that Neringa filed petitions on behalf of Daimantė, her niece, with Lithuanian courts and the child's rights ombudsman, which I guess is crime or something. They said she was making statements critical of the investigation to journalists, which is horrible. You should not do that. You should never be critical of the investigation. They said that she had described in her book case and had named the public officials involved, even though they were, according to them, completely innocent. They said that Neringa had been involved in unauthorized protests, that she had been involved in humiliating the courts, that she had been involved in desecrating the national anthem, that she had been conducting her own investigation into her niece's case, which I guess for some reason wasn't allowed. They obviously said she failed to turn over Daimantė, her niece, to her mother, who was They accused her of bruising an officer and even kicking at Daimantė's mother when the mother tried to remove Daimantė from Neringa's care. So as you can see here, she runs on this platform. She's trying to expose her own niece, and we can't have that. We have a government thing here. We have a setup. We have a way that we like it. Behind the curtain, there are a lot of allegedly in Lithuania. We can't have someone coming in here and opening that curtain and showing the world how sick us really are. So let's just throw the book at her. Let's give her any charge: bruising an officer, desecrating the national anthem, doing her own investigation. Let's just look into every single thing that we could throw against this woman in order to silence her and stop her from speaking out against these crimes. Neringa, when all this was happening, made the following statements regarding why she believed the government made the case against her. She felt as though the government wanted to silence her and had been unable to do so until this case. Neringa claimed that the government of Lithuania wanted to, quote, misguide and confuse, end quote, the public. They wanted to detract attention from the, quote, real criminals, end quote. She stated in her statement that the case would prevent her from running in parliamentary elections, and this might sway her supporters to not come and vote for her. And in doing so, in stopping her from being elected and being able to spread this message, it would stop them all from carrying out real justice in the country. She was essentially saying, they're trying to deflect and act like she's a criminal for trying to protect her own niece and trying to get justice for her own niece and her brother who was killed, and trying to make her look bad while protecting the people who had initially at the very beginning been named as. And, as it always goes, when one domino falls, so does the entire train, or whatever you'd call it, the line of dominoes. So, as you can see here, in my opinion, Lithuania, these authorities, these crooked people that were in there, were simply trying to stop that first domino from falling over. Because It's like Epstein. Why do you think they're silent about Epstein? If you get one person in there, I don't know what the system's like over in Lithuania, but here in America, you bring one person in for questioning. Maybe it's, I don't know, Bill Clinton, Trump, anybody who's involved in Epstein who might know something. I mean, you could even go through the celebrities, all the politicians, Les Wexner, any of them. If you bring them in and charge them with taking part in Epstein's crimes, well, then all of a sudden you have discovery and you have all the that would emerge, showing that both parties were involved in this blackmail operation. That's how I view this. Even if it's just two government officials that were accused initially of, this girl, this 5-year-old girl, if one of them is brought in and questioned and starts talking, maybe they stop giving a and they out everybody. It's just one of those things where they, I'm assuming, wouldn't want that to happen. Neringa believed that parliament members didn't work for the benefit of Lithuania, and she stated that in her statement. If there was a case against her, then all the officers who used force to take her niece away would not end up in jail. That's right, the officers who used brutal force, who came to her house and ripped her niece out of her arms, clear overuse of police force, I don't know what you'd call it, police brutality. None of them were going to have to pay for doing that, and she stated that 88% of Lithuanians at the time did not trust the country's judicial system. She said, quote, "The case against me is desperately needed for those dark powers that got rid of my brother and 8 more people. I'm not even sure if they do not have a ticket to the other side ready for me too, for all my pursuit of the truth." End quote. But things were about to change. So all this was coming to a boiling point. The young girl's case went nowhere. The girl who was 5 years old at the time that she was by these 3, all, done under the eyes of her own mother, who allegedly was involved to a degree. She's put back in the home with her mother. Neringa, she tries to speak the truth. She tries to get into the government to run on this anti-corruption party. She actually gets in there, and then all of a sudden they throw the book at her. They tell her, we're bringing this huge case against you. You might end up in prison for 10, 20, 50 years. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't know what would really happen. And on May 9th, 2013, Neringa went missing in Lithuania, and the Šiauliai County Prosecutor's Office announced that they had begun the search for her. However, there were people who knew where Neringa was, and that's because she had requested political asylum in the United States after fleeing there in 2013. As it turns out, Neringa fled to the United States in 2013 for at least 3 documented reasons that she's spoken of. A, she was receiving death threats. There were people calling her, threatening her. She believed she was being followed. B, she also believed that there was an attempt on her life at a political rally. Someone had already tried to kill her. And C, the Lithuanian government had essentially voted to remove her parliamentary immunity and were filing all those charges against her. So she didn't know how long she could have ended up as a political prisoner there for trying to talk about the truth. While in the United States, Neringa was able to obtain documents in order to allow her to work legally in the US. First, she worked as a nursing home aide and then as a florist in a small town here in America. Once she found out that there was a warrant out for her arrest on charges in Lithuania, she turned herself in the United States on February 13th, 2018, and was jailed in March of that same year. As part of the extradition treaty that was signed between the United States and Lithuania in 2001, people who are accused of crimes in Lithuania are not allowed to offer counter evidence in the United States courts regarding any of the charges by Lithuania, or make a case for Lithuania's political motivation. So essentially, according to this agreement, if you're wanted in Lithuania, you have a warrant, you're in America, and they're essentially trying to extradite you, according to this agreement, you cannot offer any counter evidence that refutes the charges in Lithuania against you, and you can't even explain to authorities in the United States why Lithuania would have been wanting to make this case against you in the first place. Like, if you're being politically persecuted, they do not allow you here in the US to explain to the officers, to the authorities, why a country would be doing this to you. It's really bizarre. The statute of limitations, as it turned out, on Neringa's charges had expired, but the Lithuanian government still called for her extradition back to the country, which was incredibly unusual. In October of 2017, a Lithuanian prosecutor named D. Jakurtis stated that political charges against Neringa were removed from the extradition request so that United States authorities wouldn't reject it. He also stated that if Neringa returned to Lithuania, old charges in the case that were never added in the first place could be slapped on there. Individuals in Lithuania who reached out to the United States government in writing stated that the Lithuanian government's charges against Neringa were indeed politically motivated. The people who wrote to the US government after finding out that she had been arrested and would potentially be, deported, extradited to Lithuania included former political prisoners, current and former government officials, and prominent members of society. All these people were lobbying and saying Neringa should not be sent back to Lithuania. She did nothing wrong. This is political fervor. This is absolute insanity that you're even considering this. And yet, the Lithuanian government, as skeezy as they are, worked together to figure out a plan on how they could get her back to the country by kind of going around the rules. The old charges, statute of limitations was up. We can't, have her go to prison on these charges, but they told the people in the United States, when she gets back, we might throw on old charges from the same crimes that we never tacked onto her in the first place. So they were being very sneaky. Additional evidence that Neringa's extradition was politically motivated are the following statements regarding Neringa made by a former chairman of the Supreme Court of Lithuania named Gintaras Krisvičius. This former chairman of the Supreme Court of Lithuania referred to Neringa and her case as, quote, an abscess in the legal system and an abscess in the political system, end quote, and also stated that this case in Neringa was, quote, the trouble of the whole state, end quote. April of 2018, a U.S. magistrate judge approved extradition for the charges of hindering the activities of a bailiff, failing to comply with a court's decision not associated with the penalty, for causing physical pain, for resisting against a civil servant or a person performing the functions of public administration. So that was it. She refused to comply with some sort of government charges. She hindered the activities of a bailiff. She caused physical pain, and you're going to extradite her for this. All charges approved for extradition were then related to Daimantė, the young girl, and it should be noted that all these charges that they filed against her, all these things that they said that she did, were related to that incident when Neringa refused to give up her niece and refused to hand the niece over to the police officers. It was all stemming essentially from that one event when the over 200 police officers went to the house of a judge who was keeping a hold of her niece, who had accused her own mother of forcibly removed that victim so that she could be rehomed with the mother who had. And in 2018, Neringa was arrested in Chicago at Venuis's request. December 6, 2018, Judge Virginia Kendall declined Neringa's motion to stay while her asylum case proceeded. The motion was filed in the U.S. federal court. Judge Virginia Kendall stated that Neringa had not satisfied her burden of proof. She also said that the court must respect, quote, the right of sovereign nations to enact and enforce their own criminal laws, end quote. And sadly, even though she'd fled the country under fear for her life and knowing that she was being persecuted for her outspoken views on being anti-corruption, Neringa, after being in the U.S., was extradited before her scheduled asylum hearing could take place. If she would have been allowed to attend her asylum hearing, she would have been able to present evidence of Lithuania's political motivation of the charges against her. She was never given that chance, though, and in November of 2019, Neringa was extradited back to Lithuania. She was airlifted practically back to a pit of vipers, to the mouth of hell, where tons of people wanted her silent. According to a news agency in Lithuania, she was immediately detained for a number of minor offenses, including hitting a person, refusing to obey a court order, and resisting a police officer. Originally, Neringa had 13 criminal charges against her, but due to differences between the US and Lithuanian legal systems, 9 of the charges were dropped. Dr. Vytautas Matulevičius, a supporter of Neringa's, thought that the judge who approved the extradition did not know the, quote, specifics of all post-communist countries, end quote, and probably thought that Neringa would receive an opportunity to defend herself once she was back in the country. But that never happened. November 18, 2019, Neringa was released from custody on a 10,000 euro bail, but remained under government supervision. In 2020, pre-trial investigation of Neringa was completed. A formal accusation was drawn up by the prosecution, and her status in the case changed from suspect to defendant. The case was then handed over to the Kaunas Regional Court. The court refused to satisfy the request of Neringa's attorney that stated that the charges should be dropped, as the statute of limitations had expired. In any other normal case, these charges would have been dropped. They wouldn't have even been a thing. Resisting a police officer's demands, you're going to extradite someone from another country for that? The court claimed that the charges were against Neringa before she left for the US, and that at the time she had known about the charges, so she had been hiding from Lithuanian justice and the system. The prosecutor eventually accused Neringa of 4 different crimes. I'm saying that in quotes: obstructing the activities of the bailiff, resisting a public servant, inflicting blows or slight health impairment, and failure to comply to a court decision not related to punishment. Neringa said that she did not admit guilt and exercised her right to testify after all the witnesses, alleged witnesses, provided testimony. A request by Daimantė's mother, the young girl, the victim's mother, Laimut, asked that Neringa pay 20,000 euros to her and 50 euros to her daughter for non-pecuniary damage compensation. Lawsuits were filed by an officer and the bailiff for the damage inflicted on them by Neringa. July of 2021, Neringa was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 1 year and 9 months in prison. She was released as time already served under arrest exceeded the sentence. She was ordered to pay 6,800 euros to the government for extradition expenses, 6,300 euros to Stankanite, Daimantė's mother, the victim's mother, who allegedly, and 3,500 euros to the officer and bailiff. So not only had she tried to raise the alarm about this of her own niece, now she was tried, arrested, convicted by those people that were enabling that same system, of which the were a part, and she's now forced to pay money to the victim's mother, who, according to the victim, facilitated of her by at least 3 different men. Neringa appealed and lost her appeal case in January of 2022, and she appealed to the Supreme Court of Lithuania in May of 2022. And that's really kind of where the whole thing stands. There haven't really been any major updates at this point. But what happened to Daimantė, the young girl, the 5-year-old at the time who had been by those? Where is she now, and what does she have to say about this? Well, according to information from 2020, Daimantė, the young girl, is registered in the United Nations as missing in Lithuania. Lithuania did not respond to the UN's inquest regarding the location of Daimantė or whether she's alive or not. The United Nations included her in their international search for missing persons, but no one knows if she's alive or dead. So take that information however you'd like to. Do you really think that she's just missing? Or do you think she was made missing by certain bad actors in certain governments or organizations? Here you have a girl that started this entire thing with her testimony. She's the reason why this judge is extradited from the US. Her life is threatened. She's the one that holds all the accusations and all the knowledge about what happened in her head. And she's missing. And nobody in Lithuania has even tried to track her down. The Lithuanian government, though, prosecuted other individuals involved in this whole thing for various crimes, including making false statements. These individuals that were prosecuted by the Lithuanian government for reporting on Daimantė's initial accusations and the murders and suspicious deaths that occurred surrounding them included journalists who covered the story in local press, a medical professional, Daimantė's own grandparents, Neringa's neighbor, members of the Way of Courage party, which, let me remind you, was a party founded against corruption and against. They prosecuted people who had attended Way of Courage rallies, attendees who agreed with the message who just attended. And they also prosecuted others that provided evidence that supported Daimantė's claims of. So they actually went completely on this thing, and they prosecuted people who gave evidence showing that the young 5-year-old girl at the time hadn't been lying about being by these men and now by her own mother. But of course, instead of listening to the stories and listening to the evidence, hearing it out, they prosecuted those people and silenced them. Here in the United States Representative Chris Smith, a Republican from New Jersey, made an appeal to the Lithuanian government to end the prosecution of Neringa. February 7th, 2019, he introduced a bill in the US government called the Give Judge Venckienė Her Day in Court Act. Its purpose, as stated in the document, was, quote, for the relief of Judge Neringa, who the government of Lithuania seeks on charges related to her pursuit of justice against Lithuanian public officials accused of her young niece, end quote. The bill requested the following actions for Neringa. They wanted her excluded from extradition under the treaty between the US and Lithuania. They wanted to permit her to remain in the US until a final order was received regarding her pending application for asylum. They wanted her to have free movement and not to be held in federal or state detention for any immigration-related or extradition-related offense, and they wanted to allow her to work, but that never happened. There's also Dr. Vytautas Matulevicius. On September 27, 2018, Dr. Vytautas testified on the judge's behalf at the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, U.S. Helsinki Commission. Politically motivated injustice, the extradition case of Judge Venckienė. Dr. Matulevicius made a point in his testimony to show the link between how the Lithuanian government was similar in causing obstacles of crimes by individuals in the public eye, just like the governments of the United Kingdom with the Elm Guesthouse and Belgium with Marc Dutroux had in the past. This doctor stated that Lithuania still had not eliminated the corrupt practices of the communist era, which is one of the reasons why Neringa was targeted. She had spoken out against the crimes of those in the public eye. She had spoken out against those people in power, and she was punished for it. He also pointed out to the commission that there were violations of the norms of international law if she was extradited to Lithuania. He claimed her life would be in danger. You see, at least 6 people who had been involved in the case had died. Some had been murdered, and others had died under extremely suspicious circumstances. Quote, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, every person has the right to a fair and impartial court hearing, end quote. Neringa would not receive a fair trial based on actions and statements that were taken by the Lithuanian government. Another defender of Neringa's was Abby Jolis, an international human rights litigator. On September 27, 2018, Abby testified on Neringa's behalf at the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, U.S. Helsinki Commission, Politically Motivated Injustice, the extradition case of Judge Venckienė. Like Neringa's other supporters, she stated that she felt Neringa's life would be in danger if she was sent back to Lithuania. She also pointed out that the allegations that Neringa punched a federal officer when they were trying to take her niece away. This is one of the charges that Neringa was being extradited for. She noted that in places like the US, if someone assaulted a federal officer, they would immediately be jailed. This casts doubt immediately on whether the assault was as serious as they had claimed. If she really had brutally, physically assaulted a police officer and caused pain that day, why wouldn't they have arrested her right then? Like others, Jolis believed that Neringa's extradition was politically motivated. There was also Mary Graw Leary, a professor of law, who testified at the same commission on behalf of Neringa. Leary brought her knowledge, especially on the subject of child to the forefront of their conversation. The United Nations Convention Against Transnational Crime defines as, quote, the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving and receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation, end quote. She noted that, quote, internationally, when one with control over a child receives a benefit in exchange for consenting to the child's occurs. This language encompasses intrafamilial, which is a significant problem throughout the world, end quote. As Daimantė's mother, the victim's mother, was complicit in allowing her own daughter to be. If it became known that her mother received any kind of benefit or something of value from the people that had been her daughter, the case might actually have turned into a case. But yeah, that never happened because it was never formally investigated. And remember, way back at the beginning of this, the courts actually claimed that there was deep corruption throughout this entire thing from the very beginning and tons of evidence that was never uncovered. It's also important to note that several countries have refused to extradite individuals to Lithuania because of conditions in the country. These countries include Finland, Ireland, based on the fact that Lithuanian prisons do not meet international standards, Northern Ireland, Denmark, who refused to extradite there because they believe there's a risk individuals would be tortured upon their return to Lithuania, Israel, Germany, Austria, Malta, based on the fact that Lithuanian prisons do not meet international standards, Ukraine, and Russia. So as you can see, there's some supervillains of the world on that list that will not extradite people to Lithuania because they're so hardcore and because there's torture and corruption. And we did. Why did we do that? We should have had her here, and we should have had her talk and tell the story of what she knew about in high places in Lithuania. But we went, as always, right along with the cover-up, and Neringa was technically silenced. Based on the amount of documentation and Neringa's supporters, everything in this case points to the Lithuanian government trying to cover up and protect those in high positions that commit acts of. So many things point to the corruption that ran rampant in the government at the time. The fact that a number of individuals in the case wound up dead in a short time period is a big clue that something was going on behind the scenes. Some people say it's 6 people that died, others say it's 8, but yeah, there were a lot of deaths connected to this whole thing. A number of things weren't taken into consideration in the case of Neringa, like that the statute of limitations was up, or the fact that being extradited to Lithuania may have caused a threat to her own life. And yet, for some reason, we the people here in America, our public servants, sent her over there to swim with the fishes. It seems like the government really went out of their way to get her extradited, and the US government really didn't do much to help stop them, even with the statements given and all the evidence presented. You really have to wonder how deep this all goes. I think personally, to end all of this, that Neringa herself summed it all up best. Quote, "While witnessing and living through all of this, I realized one simple thing. Those who fight for the truth follow in its footsteps. They need to be ready for anything and everything. They need to be ready to survive it all, even if it is 100 times more than one can bear, and then continue on their way." So, as we all know, these people in high places are often involved in these crimes against children. And you can see right here a clear example of a cover-up. You can see corruption in every part of this case, from the people dying to the evidence going missing to the judges or whatever the courts finding that there was corruption and failures, but then at the same time saying it never happened. Rehousing a child with the woman, their mother, who them to government. I mean, it's insane. And then the judge who's fighting for the truth flees to another country because she's afraid for her life, and they ship her right back there, literally to the danger zone. I don't know what's going on here, but it's really suspicious all the way around. And there are definitely some people in the government in Lithuania that got away with some crimes against kids. I mean, who's to say that it's just Daimantė, the young girl who was to the government? I know for a fact these rings exist in every country, so I know that it wasn't just this one victim. There are probably so many more victims that have never spoken up or are too afraid to, especially in a country like that. I mean, look at Daimantė herself, the victim. She's missing. Nobody knows where she is. The Lithuanian government is not looking for her. The UN couldn't track her down. They were looking for her, the United Nations, and she's gone. But yeah, please let me know what you thought of this story in the comments. On YouTube, if you're watching, it helps so much to actually leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever, please take 10 seconds and go leave me a 5-star review. It would make my day. I love hearing from you guys. But yeah, I'll be back next Wednesday with another episode of the Conspiracy Files. Keep that tinfoil hat on, always question everything, and stay suspicious. I'll see you guys next week.